The key wouldn't turn. I stood on the porch of a house I hadn't slept in for 11 years, my knuckles white around a ring of keys that no longer fit the locks my late husband had installed the week before he died. Behind me, gravel crunched under expensive tires. I didn't turn around. I already knew the sound of my son's car. "You're not supposed to be here yet, Mom," he said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Not concern, not grief, impatience. Inside my coat pocket, my fingers found the folded copy of my husband's will, the one the lawyer had handed me 3 days ago with a look I hadn't understood at the time. I understood it now. "Whose farm is this, Daniel?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. He just smiled and checked his watch like I was an appointment he was late for. "My name is Margaret Ellison. I'm 63 years old, and for 38 years I ran the books, the payroll, and eventually the entire operation of Ellison and Cole Structural Engineering, the firm my husband Frank and I built from a 2-desk office above a hardware store in 1988 into a company worth $14.2 million by the time he passed. I never took a salary the first 6 years. I did payroll by kerosene lamp during 2 winters when the power company shut us off for late payment. I raised our son, Daniel, in the back office on a cot, teaching him his multiplication tables between invoices. Frank and I built 2 things in our life together: the company and the 200-acre farm outside Millbrook where we raised Daniel and where Frank was buried. 3 weeks before this story starts, under the oak tree he planted the year Daniel was born. When Frank's will was read, Daniel, now 34, a managing partner at the firm, married to a woman named Vanessa who'd never worked a day she didn't photograph, received the Manhattan penthouse Frank had bought as a company asset. Market value, $5.1 million. I received the farm, 200 acres, a leaking roof, a barn that hadn't held livestock in a decade, and 41 years of memories. Everyone at the reading assumed Daniel got the better end of the deal. They were wrong, but it would take me 4 months to prove it. The locks had been changed on a Tuesday. I found out on a Thursday, when I drove 2 hours from my apartment in the city to walk the property one more time before the estate technically transferred. Daniel was already there. So was Vanessa, in a cream cashmere coat that had never seen a barn in its life, holding a glass of my late husband's good scotch, the bottle he'd been saving for Daniel's 40th birthday. Through the kitchen window, before either of them saw me, I heard Vanessa laugh, bright, careless, carrying across the yard like a bell. 200 acres of dirt and a house that smells like mothballs, she said. God, your mother really got the raw end of that will, didn't she? She got what Dad thought she deserved, Daniel said, and he wasn't laughing, but he wasn't defending me either. Don't feel bad for her. She'll sell it to some developer in a year and live off the check. It's fine. I stood outside my own kitchen door and listened to my son plan my future for me. Then Vanessa said the thing that changed everything. Just make sure the Henley deal closes before she starts asking questions about the firm's books. The farm keeps her busy. That's the point. I didn't move. I didn't breathe differently. I simply turned around, walked back to my car, and drove to the county recorder's office instead of going inside. I told myself I was only checking the property boundaries. What I found instead was a lien filing from 4 months before Frank's death. A $380,000 loan against the farm's mineral rights, co-signed with a signature that looked like Frank's, but wasn't quite. I'd watched that man sign his name for 41 years. The tail on the F was wrong. I confronted Daniel over the phone, keeping my voice soft and confused, the way I would for the rest of this story. I don't understand this loan on the farm, sweetheart. Oh, that. A pause, the particular pause of a man reaching for a lie he'd prepared in advance. Dad set up a home equity facility against the mineral rights for working capital during the Henley expansion. Standard collateralization. I can send you the paperwork, but honestly, Mom, it's boring finance stuff. Don't worry about it. Of course, dear. You always understood the numbers better than I did. I let him believe that. I had built the firm's accounting system from a spreadsheet with a broken formula bar. I understood the numbers better than anyone alive. I still had read access to Ellison and Cole's accounting software, a legacy administrator account nobody had bothered to revoke because nobody imagined the 63-year-old widow would log in. I logged in. The Henley deal Vanessa mentioned wasn't a construction contract. It was a shell entity, Henley Capital Partners LLC, registered 8 months earlier, with Daniel and Vanessa as the only listed members. $2.3 million had moved from Ellison and Cole's operating account into Henley Capital in 6 transactions, each one just under the $500,000 threshold that would have triggered a board review. 3 weeks later, I drove back out to the farm under the excuse of collecting Frank's old woodworking tools from the barn. Daniel and Vanessa were there again, walking the property with a man in a blazer who kept using the word acquisition. I hid behind the barn door, 63 years old, hiding behind a barn door like a child, and listened. "The Henley shell holds the mineral rights lien," the man in the blazer was saying. "Once your mother misses 2 payments on that loan, which she doesn't even know exists as her obligation, we foreclose through Henley, acquire the farm at a fraction of value, and you flip the land to the Meridian Development Group for the solar array project. $14 million, easy. And the firm's books?" Daniel asked. "Clean by the time anyone looks. Your mother's not going to audit anything. She barely knows how to use her own phone." Vanessa laughed that bell laugh again. "God, can you imagine her face? She thinks this is a sentimental little farm. She has no idea she's sitting on the actual inheritance." I stood in the dark of that barn with my husband's hammer in my hand and understood, finally, the whole shape of it. The farm wasn't the consolation prize. The farm was the target. Frank hadn't shortchanged me in his will. He'd hidden the real treasure where he knew Daniel wouldn't think to look. In the dirt, not the penthouse. That night, I searched the barn properly for the first time in years. Behind a false panel in Frank's old workbench, I found a fireproof lockbox. Inside, a geological survey commissioned 18 months before Frank's death, confirming that the farm's 200 acres sat over a lithium-bearing clay deposit worth an estimated $22 million in mining rights alone. A letter from Frank, dated 4 months before he died, addressed to me. "Margie, if you're reading this, someone came looking for the farm before I could tell you what it's really worth. Don't sign anything. Don't trust the loan paperwork if it appears. Call Harold Voss at the firm's old law office, not the new lawyer Daniel hired. Harold still answers to me." I called Daniel one more time, playing the same soft, confused note. "Daniel, I found some paperwork about mineral rights in your father's old files. Do you know anything about that?" "Mom, that survey's outdated. The land's basically worthless for mining. The deposit's too shallow to extract profitably. That's actually part of why Dad left you the farm instead of liquid assets. He knew it wasn't worth much beyond sentimental value. I wouldn't get your hopes up about some old geology report." "Oh, well, that's disappointing," I said. "I suppose the farm really is just a farm then." "Just a farm, Mom. Don't stress about it." I thanked him. I told him I loved him. I meant the second part. I decided, sitting alone at my kitchen table that night with Frank's letter in front of me, that Daniel and Vanessa needed to believe they had already won. So I gave them what they wanted to see. I started using a cane I didn't need, a habit that began accidentally at a family dinner 2 weeks later and never stopped. I let my hands shake slightly when I signed for the mail. I asked Daniel to explain simple things twice and thanked him with the exact grateful, slightly bewildered tone Vanessa had used to describe me behind my back. I told my daughter-in-law, unprompted, that I was thinking about selling the farm quickly before it becomes too much to manage, and watched her eyes light up like a slot machine. Internally, I was doing something else entirely. I called Harold Voss, my husband's old attorney. I met with a forensic accountant Harold recommended. I filed, quietly, a request with the county to flag any further filings against the farm's title. I opened a fireproof safe deposit box of my own and put Frank's letter and the survey inside it, with copies at Harold's office. Let them think the old woman with the cane is fading, I told myself. A dangerous woman is a woman they're watching. A pitiful one is a woman they've stopped watching at all. Weakness, I discovered, is the best surveillance equipment money can't buy. I set the bait 6 weeks later. I told Daniel, over a lunch where I let my coffee spill slightly and apologized 3 times, that I decided to sign the farm over to a family trust for simplicity, since managing paperwork had become difficult for me. I said I wanted to sign the deed transfer at a family dinner, so it feels like a celebration, not a business thing. Daniel's eyes did something he didn't know I could see anymore. A flicker of triumph, quickly smoothed over. That's a great idea, Mom. We'll do it at the Penthouse. Vanessa will cook. Vanessa never cooked. Harold wired a small recording device into the antique brooch I always wore at family events. Frank's mother's brooch, the one nobody ever looked at twice. I hired a private investigator, a quiet woman named Renata, to sit 2 tables away at the restaurant with a clear line of sight and a phone that would live stream directly to Harold's office 3 blocks away. The night before, my phone buzzed on the kitchen table at 11:47 p.m. A text forwarded from a junior associate inside Henley Capital's paperwork chain, someone who didn't like what he'd been asked to backdate. Foreclosure filing is pre-signed. They're planning to have her execute the trust document tomorrow. It's not a trust. It's a full title transfer to Henley Capital. Once she signs, the mineral rights and the land are gone in one document. Thought you should know. I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down, finished my tea, and went to bed. Tomorrow, I would need to be very, very calm. The dinner was held in the Penthouse's private dining room. Floor-to-ceiling windows over Manhattan. A table set with more forks than I'd used in my whole life on the farm. 12 guests. Daniel's business partners. Vanessa's mother. The man in the blazer from the barn, introduced tonight as our family's wealth advisor, Preston. The document sat at my place setting, already tabbed for signature. Vanessa raised a glass early. To family, she said, smiling at me with a warmth I now understood was rehearsed. And to Margaret, finally letting go of that dusty old farm, so it can be properly taken care of. Someone laughed. Daniel didn't stop them. It really is generous of her. Vanessa continued, warming to her audience, considering how confused she's gotten lately about the finances. Honestly, we've had to handle so much for her since Frank passed. Haven't we, honey? She's not as sharp as she used to be, Daniel agreed, and reached over to pat my hand like I was a well-behaved dog. But we take care of our own. I let the pen sit untouched beside the document for one long moment. Then I reached up and touched Frank's mother's brooch, the way I'd practiced. Before I sign, I said, my voice quiet, even, I'd like to say a few things about your father, Daniel. About what he actually left me. The table went still. This isn't a trust document, I said, sliding it half an inch away from my plate. It's a title transfer to Henley Capital Partners, LLC, the shell company you and Vanessa registered 8 months ago. It would move both the farm and the mineral rights beneath it directly into your control, using a lien your father never actually signed. Mom, Daniel started, color draining. The geological survey your father commissioned found a lithium deposit under that farm worth roughly $22 million. I continued, not raising my voice, laying each fact down like a card. You told me it was worthless. That was a lie. The loan you told me was standard collateralization, was forged, co-signed with a signature your father never made. I have a handwriting analyst report confirming it. And the $2.3 million you and Vanessa moved out of Ellison and Cole through Henley Capital, structured just under board review thresholds, is sitting in a Cayman account under Preston's firm's name. Preston's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. You said I wasn't sharp anymore, I said to Vanessa, and for the first time, I let something colder into my voice. I built the accounting system your husband's company still runs on. I heard you both in my own barn, planning to foreclose on me and sell my husband's grave to a solar developer for $14 million. I reached into my bag and set 2 things on the table. The first was a copy of Frank's letter. The second was my phone, screen lit, showing a live call already connected to Harold Voss's office. And, on the other end of that call, 2 detectives from the County Financial Crimes Unit who had been listening to the last 90 seconds of dinner. Detective Alvarez is downstairs, I said. He'd like to speak with you both about wire fraud, forgery, and embezzlement from a New York registered corporation. I believe Preston's firm will be receiving a subpoena by Monday. The elevator chime sounded from the hallway less than a minute later. I picked up the unsigned document, tore it once, cleanly, down the middle, and set the 2 halves on either side of my water glass. The farm was never the smaller inheritance, I said. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. He just didn't think either of you would ever bother to look. Daniel was indicted 11 weeks later on 4 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of forgery, tied to the falsified lien against the farm. He pleaded to a reduced charge and received 18 months, plus $2.3 million in court-ordered restitution to Ellison and Cole. Vanessa was charged separately for her role in structuring the Henley Capital transactions. Her legal team negotiated probation and a permanent bar from serving as an officer of any New York corporation for 10 years. The Penthouse, the $5.1 million better inheritance, was seized as part of the restitution order and sold at auction within 4 months. Preston's wealth management firm was placed under state regulatory investigation. 3 other clients came forward with similar shell company complaints once the story broke in the local business press. I took emergency control of Ellison and Cole as majority shareholder, a right I'd held quietly since Frank's death and never exercised. My first act was not punitive. I met personally with all 61 employees, guaranteed every job, and set up a profit-sharing plan Frank and I had always talked about and never gotten around to. I forgave a $40,000 advance the company's longtime office manager, Rosa, had taken against her salary years earlier to cover her mother's medical bills, a debt Daniel had recently, quietly, threatened to call in. The farm's mineral rights were leased, not sold, to a responsible energy partner, generating royalty income that will outlast me. I kept the land itself. The oak tree over Frank's grave is still there. It rained the night Daniel came back, 8 months after the dinner, 3 weeks out of a halfway house with no car, and a duffel bag soaked through at the shoulder seams. He stood on the porch of the farmhouse, the same porch, the same door, though the locks were mine again now, water running off his chin, looking smaller than I remembered him being at any point in his life, including childhood. "Mom," he said, "I have nowhere else to go." I stood in the doorway a long moment. "I loved you before I knew what you'd do," I said. "That hasn't changed, and it won't. But love isn't the same thing as a key to this house, Daniel. You'll need to find your own door." I gave him the number for a re-entry program 2 towns over, a place with a good reputation and a bed available that week. Then I closed the door, not hard, not a slam, just a soft, final click of the latch, and went back to the kitchen, where Harold, who has become considerably more than my late husband's old lawyer over these 8 months, was waiting with 2 cups of tea and no need to ask what had just happened. "You all right?" he asked. "I will be," I said, and for the first time since Frank died, I believed it completely. The people who count on you not paying attention are usually the ones who deserve it most. Being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's the best cover you'll ever have, if you're patient enough to use it. And real inheritance was never about what's written on a piece of paper. It's about who actually earned the right to hold what's been built. If someone in your life has ever tried to write you off as this smaller inheritance, tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear it. If this story hit home, hit like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.